It was just another Thursday morning. The sun barely peeked through the blinds as I hurried through our usual chaotic routine, getting Jeremy and Melissa ready for school, fixing breakfast, trying to keep an eye on the time. Everything about that day was ordinary, from the rush to the mess until the phone rang. The unfamiliar number on the screen made me pause. I hesitated, wiping my hands on a dish towel, and picked it up. "Hello?" I said, already feeling an odd chill creep up my spine. To my surprise, it was Claire. My wife rarely called in the morning, especially when we'd spoken just the night before. She was supposed to be in the middle of a work trip, attending a marketing conference in a nearby city. Her voice, usually calm and composed, carried a slight tremble that was hard to miss. "Hey, something happened last night," she started, her words hurried, almost rehearsed. "Someone stole my purse at the hotel." For a moment, I didn't react. Claire? Losing something? She was always so careful, so particular, about everything, from her handbag to the way she organized our lives. Something felt off. "What do you mean it was stolen?" I asked, trying to sound concerned but not overly suspicious. She explained, in bits and pieces, how she had left it at the hotel cashier's desk to grab a newspaper, only to return and find it gone. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. The pit in my stomach, though, it was growing, like a small seed of doubt that wouldn't stop digging deeper. "I've already informed the hotel and canceled my cards," she said. "I just need you to handle a few things on our end." Her tone shifted, almost businesslike, as if she was trying to rush through the conversation. Something about the way she brushed over the details, the nervousness in her voice, it made my skin prickle. I tried to shake it off, telling myself not to overthink it. This was Claire, my wife of 11 years. The mother of our children. What reason would I have to doubt her? But as I hung up the phone, that uneasy feeling clung to me like a shadow. Why hadn't she called me the night it happened? Why this morning? And why didn't her story add up? Claire was never absent-minded. Never. I canceled the credit cards, doing what she asked, but my mind kept circling back to her voice, her vague explanations. Every time I replayed the conversation, new questions surfaced, like cracks spreading through glass. As I sat down with my coffee, staring blankly at the kitchen window, I couldn't shake the thought, had she really lost her purse? Or was there something else? Something she wasn't telling me? The morning carried on as usual, but everything felt different. That small seed of doubt had been planted, and no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, it was already starting to grow. The following days passed without much event, but the weight of that conversation stayed with me. Claire returned home from her trip late Friday evening, just as planned. She was tired, of course, as she always was after traveling. Yet there was something different in the way she greeted me. I had expected the usual warmth, her quick kiss on the cheek, her playful "I miss you," but instead she seemed distracted. Her eyes barely met mine, and her smile felt forced. She gave the kids their hugs, asking them about school, and then hurried upstairs to unpack. Normally she would settle in with us first, catch up on the few days she'd been away. But not this time, as I watched her disappear up the stairs. That familiar feeling from the phone call came rushing back. Something wasn't right. It wasn't just the purse anymore. It was the way she avoided eye contact, the hurried tone in her voice when she said she needed to unpack, as if she didn't want to be near me for too long. I tried to convince myself I was being paranoid. After all, Claire had always been a busy woman, juggling work and family. She was allowed to be tired, right? But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about exhaustion. This was something more. Later that night, I found myself sitting on the edge of our bed, watching as Claire moved around the room. She was getting ready for bed, her back to me as she took off her earrings, placed them delicately on the nightstand, and slipped into her pajamas. She didn't say much, just a brief, "Long day," before she climbed under the covers. "How was the trip?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Fine," she replied, her voice flat, almost uninterested. "Just the usual meetings. Nothing exciting. She turned off the bedside lamp before I could ask anything more. The darkness filled the room, and so did the silence between us. For the first time in a long while, I felt a distance between us, something unspoken, like a wall that hadn't been there before. I stared at the ceiling, the thoughts in my mind spinning faster with each passing second. Her body lay beside me, but her presence felt distant. There were no lingering conversations, no sharing of little moments from her trip. The Claire I knew, the Claire who used to tell me everything, wasn't here tonight. As I lay there, a thought began to form in the back of my mind, a dangerous thought. What if this stolen purse wasn't the real issue? What if there was something else Claire was hiding? The distance between us wasn't just physical, it was emotional, and it was growing with every passing day. I turned my head to look at her, barely able to make out her face in the dim light. She was already asleep, or at least pretending to be. Her breathing was steady, but mine wasn't. My heart was pounding in my chest, each beat louder than the last. Something had shifted between us. I just didn't know what it was yet. The next morning, everything seemed back to normal, or at least Claire pretended it was. She woke up early, preparing breakfast for the kids and chatting with them about their upcoming weekend plans. Her laugh, her smile, everything felt forced, like she was playing a part she knew too well. I watched her closely, trying to find something in her behavior that could explain the growing distance I felt between us. She was good at keeping up appearances, but I wasn't convinced anymore. My mind kept returning to the same question: what was she hiding? As we finished breakfast, she told me she needed to run some errands. A normal Saturday routine, but this time, it felt different. She wasn't asking if I needed anything, wasn't offering to take one of the kids along like she usually did. Instead, she grabbed her purse and keys, and with a quick kiss on the cheek, she was gone. For a few moments, I just stood there, staring at the door. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. And then, out of nowhere, an impulse hit me, a small voice in my head that I couldn't ignore. I needed to check her car. My heart raced as I made my way into the garage. The silence was heavy, the sound of my footsteps echoing against the walls. There was no real reason to believe I'd find anything. But that voice in my head wouldn't let go. Something inside me pushed me forward. I opened the driver's door and hesitated. The familiar scent of her perfume lingered in the air, but there was something else, a faint feeling of wrongness, like I didn't belong here. But I pushed through the discomfort, reaching over to open the glove compartment. At first glance, nothing seemed out of place, just the usual car documents, some napkins, and loose change. But as I dug deeper, my hand brushed against something unexpected. I pulled it out slowly, and there it was, lying in my palm, a small, unopened package of protection. I stared at it, my breath catching in my throat. My mind went blank for a moment, unable to process what I was holding. It felt like the world had just shifted beneath me, like everything I thought I knew had been a lie. Claire and I hadn't needed protection for years. Not since our second child. There was no reason for her to have this in her car, unless a cold chill ran through me. I tried to rationalize it, tell myself that there had to be a logical explanation, but deep down, I knew. The truth was staring me in the face, and it felt like a punch to the gut. I closed the glove compartment, my hand trembling as I placed the package back where I found it. My heart was racing, my mind spinning with questions I didn't want to ask. As I closed the car door and walked back into the house, the world around me felt different. Everything seemed darker, more suffocating. I was trapped in my own home, with a truth that I wasn't ready to face. The seed of doubt had grown into something more, something that I couldn't ignore anymore. I spent the rest of that day in a daze. The kids went about their usual activities, playing outside, watching TV, but I was elsewhere, lost in my thoughts. Every sound, every movement seemed distant, like I was watching my life from behind a glass wall. My mind kept returning to that package in Claire's car, replaying the moment I found it over and over again. I couldn't escape it. What was once a small seed of doubt had now fully bloomed into something undeniable, something I didn't want to face. There were no more excuses left to make, no more rationalizations to ease my mind. I knew what the protection meant. There was no other explanation. The realization felt like a heavy weight pressing down on my chest, suffocating me. Claire, the woman I had loved and trusted for over a decade, was hiding something from me, something that threatened to destroy everything we had built together. I tried to act normal, keeping my voice steady when talking to the kids, smiling when they asked for my attention. But beneath the surface, I was falling apart. When Claire came home that afternoon, she was her usual self, smiling, laughing with the kids, asking me how my day was. But all I could see was the lie. Every word that came out of her mouth felt fake. Every smile forced. How long had she been hiding this from me? How many times had she lied, pretending everything was fine while she was leading a double life? I couldn't look at her the same way. That night, after the kids had gone to bed, Claire and I sat on the couch together, watching some show that neither of us was really paying attention to. She was right next to me, but the distance between us had never felt greater. I kept stealing glances at her, wondering if she could sense the change in me, if she knew that I had found her secret. At one point, she leaned her head on my shoulder, something she had done 1,000 times before. But this time, it felt different. There was no comfort in her touch, only emptiness. I couldn't take it anymore. I gently moved away from her, pretending that I needed to get something from the kitchen. As I stood by the sink, gripping the counter, I felt a wave of anger wash over me. How could she do this to me? To us? To our family? I wanted to confront her right then and there, to demand answers, but the words caught in my throat. I wasn't ready for the truth. Instead, I went to bed early, leaving Claire on the couch, still lost in the world of the TV show. As I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, I knew that everything had changed. There was no going back now. The lie was too big, too real to ignore. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. The next few days felt like a blur. I moved through them in a state of numbness, going through the motions of my routine but always with that nagging voice in the back of my mind. Every time I looked at Claire, I saw her differently. I couldn't help but wonder where she was when she wasn't home, who she was with, and how many lies she told me over the years. It was unbearable. I knew I couldn't just sit around and do nothing. If I was going to confront her, I needed more than a package of protection. I needed proof. Cold, undeniable proof that would force her to admit what she had done. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Claire stepped out to run a quick errand. It was the perfect opportunity. I went straight to her phone. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach as I unlocked it, something I had never done before. We had always trusted each other. I never felt the need to invade her privacy. But this wasn't about trust anymore. It was about finding the truth. I scrolled through her messages, trying to calm the shaking in my hands. At first, everything seemed normal. Messages to friends, colleagues, harmless conversations. But as I scrolled further, I saw something that made my heart stop. There it was, a string of messages from an unknown number. Someone she had clearly been in regular contact with. The tone of the conversation was casual at first, nothing out of the ordinary. But as I kept scrolling, the content became different. More personal. More intimate. My pulse quickened as I read through the messages, each one a dagger in my chest. Inside jokes, secret plans, meeting up in hotels, it was all there. The familiarity between them was undeniable. Whoever this person was, Claire had been seeing him behind my back. I felt sick. My body felt cold, my hands trembling as I scrolled faster. I didn't want to see any more, but I couldn't stop myself. The more I read, the more everything started to make sense. The missing pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, and the truth was more devastating than I could have ever imagined. Suddenly, the sound of the garage door opening jolted me out of my trance. Claire was home. I quickly locked her phone and placed it back exactly where I had found it, my heart pounding in my chest. I moved to the couch, trying to look as normal as possible, but my mind was racing. What was I going to do now? Claire walked in, smiling as she kicked off her shoes and tossed her keys on the table. She greeted me like nothing was wrong, like she hadn't just shattered my world. I forced a smile, but inside, I was falling apart. The days that followed felt like a twisted nightmare. Every interaction with Claire was a painful reminder of what I now knew. She carried on like nothing had changed, completely unaware that I had discovered the truth. But I could see through her now. Every word she spoke felt like a lie, every smile a mask to cover her betrayal. I couldn't look at her the same way anymore. The woman I had married, the mother of my children, had become a stranger. Yet, despite the anger boiling inside me, I couldn't bring myself to confront her, not yet. I had to keep playing along, pretending that everything was fine, while inside I was coming undone. One evening, as we sat at the dinner table, Claire was laughing at something Jeremy said. Her laughter felt hollow to me, like an echo of the person she once was. I watched her, studying her, every move, every expression. She was good at pretending, so good that if I hadn't seen those messages, I might have believed her, but I knew better now. As the evening wore on, Claire mentioned she had another work trip coming up. My heart sank. It was the same routine, a few days out of town, supposedly for meetings. But now I knew what those trips really meant. They were her excuses to see him. When do you leave? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Thursday morning, she said casually, not even looking up from her plate. It's just a quick trip, I'll be back by Saturday. I nodded, biting my tongue to keep from saying anything more. A part of me wanted to explode, to throw the truth in her face, to ask her how long she thought she could keep lying to me. But I held back. I had to. Not yet. Later that night, after the kids had gone to bed, Claire and I sat together in the living room, the TV playing in the background. The silence between us was deafening. She was sitting right next to me, but the distance between us felt immeasurable. I couldn't take it anymore. Claire, I said softly, breaking the silence. She turned to look at me. Her expression calm, almost too calm. What is it? She asked, her voice gentle. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to say so many things, to ask her about the messages, about the man, about the lies. But the words wouldn't come out. Instead, I forced a smile. Nothing. Just tired, I guess. She smiled back, leaning her head on my shoulder. You've been working too hard, she murmured. You need to take it easy. Her words cut through me like a knife. How could she say that? How could she pretend to care, when I knew she was planning her next escape? I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm, to hold back the storm of emotions raging inside me, as she drifted off to sleep beside me. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. I couldn't keep living like this. The lies, the betrayal, it was all too much. Something had to change, but for now, I had to wait. Thursday morning arrived faster than I had anticipated. Claire packed her suitcase the night before, making her usual preparations for her work trip. Watching her move around the room, folding clothes and organizing her things, I felt a mixture of anger and disbelief. How could she do this? How could she look me in the eye, knowing what she was about to do? I barely slept that night, the weight of what I knew pressing down on me. When the morning came, I forced myself to act normal, keeping my voice steady and my actions routine. Claire kissed me goodbye at the door, the way she always did, her smile as convincing as ever. But this time, I didn't kiss her back. Take care of yourself, she said, her eyes searching mine, but I only nodded, watching her walk away. The moment the door closed behind her, something shifted inside me. I wasn't going to sit around and let this continue. I couldn't. As soon as Claire was gone, I grabbed my phone and called the private investigator I had contacted earlier in the week. I had debated whether I should take that step, but after seeing the messages, there was no turning back. I needed undeniable proof, something that would force Claire to confess, something that would leave no room for her lies. Mr. Carter? The investigator answered, his voice calm and professional. Yes, I replied, trying to keep my own voice steady. She just left for her trip. You know what to do. We'll handle everything, he reassured me. We'll follow her and report back with whatever we find. I hung up the phone, my heart racing. There was no turning back now. The investigation was in motion, and soon I would have the truth I needed. But as much as I wanted to know, the thought of what they might find made me sick. The day passed slowly. I tried to keep busy, distracting myself with work, helping the kids with their school projects, but my mind kept drifting back to Claire. Where was she? Who was she with? What excuse had she given him this time? By evening, I could barely focus. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart skipped a beat, wondering if it was the investigator with news. But each time, it was just another message or call that had nothing to do with Claire's trip. The anticipation was killing me. Finally, as the night settled in and the kids were tucked into bed, I received a text. My hands trembled as I unlocked my phone, reading the short message from the investigator. We've got something. I'll send the details in the morning. My stomach twisted into knots. I had expected this, of course. I had prepared myself for what they might find. But knowing that they had uncovered something, that Claire's betrayal was about to be laid bare before me, it was more than I could handle in that moment. I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over me. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, I would have to face the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The next morning, I woke up before the sun, my heart heavy with the weight of what was to come. I barely slept that night, tossing and turning, my mind consumed with thoughts of Claire and whatever the investigator had found. Today was the day, whether I was ready for it or not. As the house remained quiet, with the kids still asleep, I reached for my phone. There was a message waiting for me from the investigator. My hand shook as I opened it, feeling the gravity of the moment. Check your email, the message read. I took a deep breath, bracing myself for whatever was waiting for me in my inbox. As I opened the email, a series of photos loaded on the screen. My heart sank as I scrolled through them, each image more devastating than the last. The first photo was of Claire, stepping out of her car, dressed in the same business attire she wore when she left the house. Nothing out of the ordinary. The next few images, however, showed her meeting a man outside a hotel. My blood ran cold as I recognized him. The man from the text messages. The photos showed them walking into the hotel together. Their body language intimate, close. But the image that hit me the hardest was the one of them sitting in the hotel bar later that evening, her hand resting on his, both of them laughing, completely at ease. Claire wasn't just having an affair, she was living another life, one that had nothing to do with me or our family. As I scrolled further, I came across the final photo, the two of them entering a hotel room together. That was it. The undeniable proof that she was cheating. Everything I had feared, everything I had tried to avoid confronting, was now staring me in the face. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen, the images burning into my mind. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't breathe. I had always imagined this moment would feel different, maybe filled with anger, or even a sense of closure. But all I felt was an overwhelming sense of loss. The woman I thought I knew, the life we had built together, it all felt like a lie now. The reality of her betrayal hit me harder than I could have ever prepared for. How long had this been going on? How many times had she lied to me, smiled at me, kissed me, knowing she was seeing someone else? I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there in stunned silence, unable to move, unable to think of what to do next. The truth was right in front of me, and yet it didn't bring any relief, only a deep, hollow ache that seemed to consume everything inside me. As the house began to stir with the sounds of the kids waking up, I quickly closed the email and shoved my phone aside. There was no time to process it, not yet. I had to keep going, keep pretending, for the kids at least. But I knew that everything had changed. The truth was out, and there was no going back. The question now was, what was I going to do about it? The day moved in slow motion. Everything felt distant, unreal, like I was living in someone else's life. I got the kids ready for school, answered their innocent questions, and smiled at their jokes. On the surface, I was the same dad I'd always been, but inside, I was a wreck. Every second felt like I was teetering on the edge of an emotional cliff, and yet I couldn't let it show. Not yet. Claire called in the afternoon, just to check in. The sound of her voice on the other end of the line sent a cold wave through me. How could she speak to me like nothing was wrong? How could she carry on this charade, knowing what she had done just hours before? Hey, everything good at home? She asked, her voice light, as if she hadn't spent the night with someone else. I forced myself to sound normal, steady. Yeah, everything's fine, I said, swallowing the bile rising in my throat. Kids are good. There was a pause on her end, and for a moment, I wondered if she could sense the shift in me. Did she know that I had found out? Did she feel the distance growing between us? But then, she just continued, talking about how tired she was and how much work was piling up. As the conversation ended, I hung up the phone, feeling hollow. There was no anger in me, not yet, just a deep, aching sadness that seemed to weigh down every part of me. I didn't know how I was going to get through the rest of the day, let alone the weekend. That night, after the kids had gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room. The quiet of the house felt suffocating. Normally, I'd enjoy this time to myself, but now, the silence only amplified my thoughts. I kept replaying the images in my mind, the photos of Claire with him. The way she looked at him, the way they were so comfortable together, it made me sick. She was so good at hiding it. So good at pretending. I poured myself a drink, hoping it would numb the pain, but it didn't help. I felt trapped in my own mind, in my own life. The truth had taken hold of me, and I didn't know how to shake it. As I sat there, staring at the walls of the home we had built together, I realized something. This wasn't just about the affair. It wasn't just about the lies. It was about the fact that everything we had, the trust, the love, the life we shared, was gone. It had been slipping away for a long time, and now it was finally over. But what was I going to do about it? Confront her? Scream? Leave? I didn't know. All I knew was that I couldn't go on like this, living a lie. The hours dragged on, and I felt the weight of exhaustion pulling me under. But even as I tried to sleep, the images of Claire's betrayal haunted me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her with him, laughing, touching, living a life that didn't include me. I didn't know how much longer I could hold it together. By the time Claire returned from her trip on Saturday afternoon, I had already rehearsed the conversation 100 times in my head. I knew I had to confront her, but I still wasn't ready for the fallout. What would she say? Would she deny it? Apologize? Try to explain everything away, like it was some sort of misunderstanding? None of the answers I imagined seemed to satisfy the growing ache in my chest. The moment she walked through the door, she greeted the kids first. They ran to her, arms open, excited to have their mom back. She smiled at them, laughing as she hugged them, her voice filled with warmth and joy, the same warmth that had once been reserved for me. Now it felt hollow. Fake. I watched them, standing in the kitchen, feeling like an outsider in my own home. She didn't even notice me at first, caught up in the moment with the kids. But when she finally did, her eyes met mine, and for a brief second, I thought I saw something in them, a flicker of worry, of hesitation. Did she know? Did she sense the storm brewing just beneath the surface? Hey, everything okay? She asked, coming over to kiss me on the cheek, her smile still plastered on like nothing was wrong. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Yeah, I said quietly, forcing the word out. We spent the rest of the afternoon together as a family, but every minute felt heavier than the last. I kept looking at her, watching her every move, every word, trying to figure out how I was going to bring it up. How I was going to tell her that I knew everything. By the time evening rolled around, and the kids had finally gone to bed, I couldn't hold it in any longer. We sat in the living room, the TV playing in the background, but I barely noticed it. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my mind was spinning with all the things I needed to say. "Claire," I started, my voice barely above a whisper. She glanced at me, her smile fading slightly. "What's up?" she asked, her tone casual, but there was a slight edge to it, like she sensed something was coming. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside me. "I need to ask you something." She turned toward me fully now, her face serious, her eyes searching mine. "What's going on? You're scaring me." I hesitated, the words caught in my throat. But I couldn't back down now. I couldn't keep pretending. "Who is he?" Her face went pale. For a moment, she didn't move, didn't say anything. Just silence. The air between us was heavy, filled with unspoken truths. Then she blinked, her mouth opening as if to speak, but nothing came out. She looked away, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. "I don't know what you're talking about," she finally whispered, but her voice cracked, betraying her. I shook my head, my heart pounding harder. "I know, Claire. I know about the texts. The hotel. Everything." Her eyes widened, and for a second, I thought I saw tears forming. She opened her mouth to speak again, but I cut her off. "Don't lie to me," I said, my voice firm. "I deserve the truth." Claire looked down at her hands, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of her own lies was finally catching up with her. The room was dead silent, except for the faint sound of the TV in the background, but that seemed a million miles away now. Everything in this moment hinged on her next words. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I never wanted to hurt you." The words hung in the air, like a confession, and yet they didn't bring the relief I thought they would. Instead, they felt empty, meaningless. A hollow apology for something that could never be undone. I stood up, my hands trembling as I paced the room. "How long?" I asked, my voice shaking. Claire wiped a tear from her cheek, her eyes red now, filled with regret. "A few months," she admitted. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. It just happened." I stopped, staring at her, trying to understand. Trying to make sense of how our life had come to this. But there was no understanding, no logic that could explain away the betrayal. "Why, Claire?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why did you do this?" She shook her head, tears streaming down her face now. "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know. I was lost. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But it was more than a mistake. It was a choice she made every time she met him, every time she lied to me, to our kids. There was no going back from this." I stood there, the silence stretching between us, the weight of her betrayal sinking in deeper than ever. The weight of Claire's confession hung in the air long after her words faded. The living room, once a place of warmth and comfort, now felt cold, unfamiliar. Everything had changed in an instant. The woman I had spent over a decade with, the mother of my children, had shattered the trust we had built, and no apology could mend what was broken. We sat there in silence for what felt like an eternity. Claire's quiet sobs were the only sound in the room, and though part of me wanted to comfort her, I couldn't. I was too numb, too hurt. Every breath felt heavy, every thought clouded by the reality of what had happened. "I never meant for it to go this far," she finally whispered, her voice trembling. I was confused. I felt like I lost myself. "It doesn't mean I don't love you." Her words stung. How could she claim to love me while betraying everything we stood for? The contradiction twisted inside me, making it harder to process what she was saying. Love, real love, didn't come with lies and infidelity. "If you loved me," I said quietly, my voice shaking with the effort of holding back my emotions, "you wouldn't have done this." Claire's sobs grew louder, but I didn't look at her. I couldn't. I felt like I was drowning in the pain, in the betrayal, and seeing her like this only made it worse. There were no answers that could make this better, no explanations that would undo the damage. I thought I could control it, she continued, her voice desperate now, as if she was clinging to whatever hope was left. I thought I could stop, but I couldn't. I didn't know how to get out of it, once it started. Her words felt like a broken record, spinning in circles. Excuses? Regret. It all sounded the same, and none of it mattered anymore. The damage had been done. I stood up, needing to move, to get away from the suffocating weight of the moment. My mind was spinning, my chest tight with anger and sorrow. I couldn't bear to stay in the same room with her, to hear more of the same empty words. I need some air, I muttered, heading for the door. Claire reached out, her voice frantic. Wait. Please, we can work through this. I love you. I don't, I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. Just don't. I walked out the door, the cool night air hitting me like a wave of relief. I inhaled deeply, trying to calm the storm raging inside me. The house behind me felt like a prison, a place where everything I thought I knew had been turned upside down. I stood outside, staring at the stars, wondering how it had come to this. How had I missed the signs? Had I been too focused on our daily lives, on the kids, to notice that Claire had slipped away from me? Or had she been that good at hiding it? The truth was, it didn't matter. Whether I saw it coming or not, the result was the same. We were broken now. And I didn't know if we could ever be whole again. After what felt like hours, I walked back inside. Claire was still on the couch, her head in her hands, tears streaking down her face. I felt a flicker of sympathy, but it was quickly drowned by the bitterness rising in my chest. We need to figure out what's next, I said, my voice flat. For the kids. Claire looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. I want to fix this, she whispered. I'll do anything. Please don't give up on us. Her words hung in the air, but I couldn't respond. I didn't have an answer. I didn't know if there was anything left to save. The days that followed were a blur of emotions, anger, sadness, confusion. Claire and I barely spoke. We moved around the house like strangers, trying to keep things normal for the kids. But every interaction, every forced smile, felt like a hollow echo of the life we used to have. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together, Claire and him, laughing, touching. The image haunted me, making it impossible to find any peace. My mind kept spinning, with questions that had no answers. Why? How? Could I ever forgive her? Claire tried, in her way, to fix things. She apologized every chance she got, promising to do whatever it took to make things right. She suggested counseling, begged me to talk about how we could rebuild our relationship. But I couldn't find it in me to engage. The wound was too fresh, the betrayal too deep. One evening, after putting the kids to bed, Claire sat across from me at the kitchen table. Her eyes were puffy from crying, her hands trembling as she reached for mine. Please, she whispered, we can't let it end like this. I don't want to lose you. I stared at her, my heart heavy with a mixture of anger and sorrow. Part of me wanted to believe her, to try and salvage what we had. But another part of me, the part that had seen the messages, the photos, the lies, was too hurt to imagine moving forward together. I don't know if I can do this, Claire, I said, my voice low. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. Her face crumpled, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. I know, she said softly. I know I broke something between us, and I'm so sorry. But we have to try. For the kids. For us. The mention of the kids hit me hard. Jeremy and Melissa, our whole world. They didn't know what was happening between us, didn't see the cracks forming beneath the surface. I couldn't stand the thought of them being caught in the middle of our brokenness. We can't pretend like everything's okay, I said, shaking my head. It's not just about us anymore. This changes everything. I know, Claire whispered. But I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn your trust back. I'll go to counseling, I'll cut off all contact with him. I'll do anything. Her words hung in the air, heavy with desperation. I could see the guilt eating away at her, the regret that came too late. And for a moment I considered the possibility that we could work through this, that maybe, just maybe, we could rebuild what was shattered. But as I looked at her, I realized something. It wasn't just about trust. It wasn't just about the betrayal. It was about the person I had become in the aftermath, someone who was no longer sure of who he was or what he wanted. The life we had built together had been built on a foundation that now felt irreparably broken. I need time, I said finally, pulling my hand away from hers. I can't make any decisions right now. I need space to figure out what I want. What's best for me? For the kids. Claire nodded, wiping her tears away with the back of her hand. I understand, she whispered. I'll give you whatever time you need. Just, please don't give up on us. In the weeks that followed, I stayed true to my word. I needed space, time to think, to process everything that had happened. Claire moved out temporarily, staying with her sister while I stayed in the house with the kids. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. The constant presence of her guilt and my anger was too much to bear under one roof. The kids, thankfully, were young enough that they didn't fully understand what was happening. Claire and I agreed to keep things as normal as possible for them, not wanting to burden them with the weight of our problems. I told them that Mom needed a break from work, that she was staying with Aunt Lisa for a while, and they accepted it without too many questions. But as the days turned into weeks, I realized that the space wasn't giving me the clarity I had hoped for. If anything, it was making things more confusing. Every time I thought about Claire, about what she had done, my emotions swung wildly between anger and sadness, love and betrayal. I didn't know what to feel anymore. One night, after the kids had gone to sleep, I sat down with a glass of whiskey, staring out the window at the quiet street outside. The memories of our life together flashed through my mind, our wedding day, the birth of our children, the countless moments of laughter and love. And then, the betrayal. The lies. The affair. I knew what I needed to do. The next morning, I called Claire and asked her to come over. She arrived that afternoon, looking nervous, her eyes red and tired. We sat down at the kitchen table, the same place where we had shared so many meals, so many conversations. But this one would be different. I've made a decision, I said, my voice steady. Claire looked at me, her hands gripping the edge of the table. What is it? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I can't do this anymore, I said, the words heavy but certain. I can't live with this betrayal. I can't pretend like things can go back to the way they were. I've thought about it, and I can't. The silence that followed was suffocating. Claire's face crumpled as she realized what I was saying. Tears filled her eyes, and she nodded slowly, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. I understand, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. I nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. It's not just about what you did, I continued. It's about me. I need to move on. I need to figure out who I am without this constant pain. And I don't think we can do that together. Claire wiped her tears, her breath shaky. What about the kids? She asked, her voice barely holding together. We'll figure it out, I said. We'll share custody. We'll make it work. But as far as us, I think it's over. The divorce process was painful but necessary. Claire and I agreed to joint custody of the kids. And we did our best to keep things amicable for their sake. The house, once filled with laughter and love, now felt like a shell of what it had been, and I knew that I needed to move on, physically and emotionally. It wasn't easy. There were days when the loneliness felt unbearable, when the weight of what had happened crushed me. But slowly, I began to rebuild. I focused on the kids, on my work, on rediscovering who I was outside of my marriage. Claire and I stayed in contact for the sake of the children, but the closeness we once shared was gone, replaced by a polite distance. She moved into a small apartment nearby, and while I could see the regret in her eyes every time we spoke, I knew that I had made the right decision. In time, the pain began to fade. It didn't disappear completely, but it became easier to bear. I found solace in the small moments with my kids, in the quiet of a new routine. And though I wasn't sure what the future held, I knew that I was finally on a path toward healing.